I'm going to talk about cranial strains. So one question I get is, does Revive address cranial strains like torsion, right side bend, and other types of strains that you hear like osteopaths talk about? And my answer is yes. Yes, without doing all of this osteopathic stuff. And today I want to explain why. First, what are cranial strains, right? I think some folks are very familiar with it. I think it's a lot of good content, especially on TikTok and whatnot these days. So I think one thing important to understand is that the skull is not one piece. It's made of about 22 cranial bones that are connected at sutures, and the skull sort of breathes. Like all the bones move in a certain way, right? And I think some people call this the cranial sacral rhythm. Other people have other names for it. But basically, the skull is structured in this way so that if it were to take impact, the fact that it's so many pieces means that it can absorb this impact. Whereas if it was just one solid piece, like and you hit it or you drop it, its likelihood to crack is much higher. So what are the different types of cranial strain patterns? You have vertical strains, lateral strains, torsion, like twisting, side bending, rotation, compression patterns. And if you've been to an osteopath, they'll use these terms, and they'll, depending on what they diagnose you having, they'll give you different treatment approaches. I think this is the wrong way to look at this problem. And the reason why, the metaphor I like to give is that I look at the skull as kind of like a crushed Coke can, right? Now you could crush a Coke can by stamping on it, and you could look at it and be like, all right, like, does this thing have torsion or side bend? But if you were to treat it, like if you were to take this crushed Coke can and you were to try to work out every dent, from the outside even, you're going to be sitting there a very long time. And I would argue that like you're never really going to completely fix it, because you're going to work out one dent in one area at some point, and then that's probably going to affect some other area. And it's just very hard to fix the problem that way. Whereas the way I think you should try to fix it, which is much faster, is you just, if you were to like blow into a Coke can very hard, right? Or if you were to stick an air pump to the Coke can, like you would work out all of the dents in that Coke can quite well, right? And that's how I sort of view this process with Reviv, is that by stretching the soft tissue, you're essentially inflating the skull from kind of the inside. And so all these bones, even if they're in torsion or side bend or whatever, like they will all fix over time. And that you just like it almost doesn't matter which one you have, because regardless of which one you have, like the process is the same. Like you're stretching the soft tissue and inflating. And with time, you basically unwind these different cranial strain patterns. And when you do unwind them, you unwind them in a permanent way. I think if you compare that against people that have their different strain patterns, like I've rarely ever seen someone that said, okay, I had this cranial strain. I went to an osteopath or a cranial psychotherapist and I got rid of it forever. And I never had to go back. I never heard that, to be honest. Whereas with Reviv, I think if people stick with it, like you're going to hear that every single time. That to me tells you something. Like Reviv is doing something that is going to be permanent, because we're kind of solving this at the root cause and fixing the skull. So that probably sounds a little bit crazy to some of you, especially those of you that have done a lot of osteopathy and have a certain way of looking at this problem. Like I'm challenging you to look at the problem quite differently. But if you're doing Reviv for a while now, I think what I'm saying here is going to start to make sense more and more, the longer you do Reviv. Thank you.